Why Pedro Sánchez should be considered for next year's Nobel Peace Prize. There are many politicians who speak the language of peace when it is convenient. There are far fewer who are willing to pay a political price for it. That is why Pedro Sánchez deserves serious consideration as a candidate for next year's Nobel Peace Prize. The Nobel Peace Prize should not be reserved only for saints, dissidents, or post-war icons. It should also recognize political leaders who use state power, diplomatic capital, and international visibility to defend peace, international law, and human dignity when doing so is unpopular, costly, and politically dangerous. By that standard, Sánchez has built a case that is stronger than many of his critics want to admit. Spain under his leadership formally recognized the state of Palestine in May 2024 alongside Ireland and Norway, explicitly presenting that move as part of a push for ceasefire and a two-state solution. That was not a symbolic gesture made in a vacuum. It was a deliberate act of European political courage at a time when much of the West preferred caution, vagueness, or silence. What makes Sánchez's case especially notable is not merely that he took a position, but that he sustained it. In 2025 and 2026, he continued to speak in unusually blunt moral and political terms about the devastation in Gaza and the wider danger of escalation in the Middle East. Reuters reported in March 2026 that he denounced the economic and human fallout of the Iran war, called the military actions illegal, and again condemned the destruction being inflicted on civilians. In an era when many European leaders have perfected the art of saying almost nothing while sounding grave, Sánchez has chosen clarity. That does not make him universally admired. It does make him relevant to the spirit of the Peace Prize. A serious argument for Sánchez is that peace is not only the absence of war. Peace also depends on whether democracies are willing to defend a rules-based international order even when allies are involved. Recognition of Palestine did not end the war. No honest person would claim that. But it challenged the dangerous idea that Palestinian nationhood can be postponed indefinitely while civilians continue to die and diplomacy remains frozen. It pushed the debate in Europe away from managed paralysis and toward political accountability. After Spain, Ireland, and Norway moved, the issue of recognition no longer looked fringe or rhetorical. It became a concrete policy path that other states had to engage with. That matters. His defenders can make a second argument as well. Sánchez has tried to link peace abroad with democratic legitimacy at home. Since taking office in 2018, he has repeatedly presented Spain as a country that should embody pluralism, equality, and negotiated politics rather than reactionary nationalism. Reuters notes that he formed Spain's first gender parity government in 2018, and his government later promoted broader gender parity rules in politics and business. Those are not Peace Prize achievements in isolation, but they are part of a wider model of democratic inclusion. A leader who argues for peace internationally while normalizing representation and civic equality domestically is building a coherent political ethic, not merely collecting talking points. There is also the matter of Europe's political mood. Sánchez has often stood apart from the drift toward cynicism, securitized language, and moral outsourcing. At a moment when many governments treat humanitarian law as optional depending on who violates it, he has tried to assert that the same legal and ethical standards must apply universally. That insistence is one reason he has drawn so much hostility. But Nobel candidacies are not supposed to reward comfort. They are supposed to recognize consequential acts that shift the moral weather. His supporters could further argue that he represents a rare type of European leader. One willing to combine social democratic domestic governance, multilateral diplomacy, and outspoken criticism of mass civilian suffering. Spain's economy has also remained comparatively resilient, with the Bank of Spain recently upgrading its 2026 growth forecast to 2.3%, helped by tourism, domestic consumption, and population growth. That does not prove peacemaking. It does show that Sánchez's international positions have not come from a state in collapse or from purely theatrical politics. He has paired foreign policy activism with the management of a functioning European economy. Still, an intellectually honest article cannot turn into propaganda. There are real objections. First, Pedro Sánchez has not negotiated a peace agreement, ended a war, or personally mediated a historic settlement. If one takes a narrow view of the Nobel Peace Prize, that may count heavily against him. Second, his domestic political position is deeply contested. Reuters has reported that he intends to run again in 2027 despite corruption investigations surrounding figures in his governing orbit, and those controversies plainly weaken the moral clarity of his broader leadership narrative. A Nobel Peace Prize candidate is not required to be spotless, but the committee would have to decide whether his international record outweighs the damage caused by domestic scandal around his administration. Third, some of Sánchez's own policy ambitions have stalled in Parliament, exposing the limits of his governing strength. Reuters reported this week that his proposed 100% tax on property purchases by non-EU buyers has stalled in Congress. That issue is domestic and unrelated to peace, but it illustrates a larger truth. Sánchez is a bold rhetorician operating within a fragile coalition system. Admirers see resolve. Critics see grand gestures with uneven execution. And yet, none of those objections destroys the central case. The Nobel Peace Prize has often been awarded not only for final victories, but for changing the diplomatic and moral landscape. Sánchez's strongest claim is precisely there. He helped make Palestinian recognition a matter of mainstream European statecraft rather than perpetual postponement. He has spoken more forcefully than most Western leaders about the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza and the wider dangers of regional war. He has defended a vision of Europe in which peace is inseparable from law, dignity, and political courage. So should Pedro Sánchez win the Nobel Peace Prize next year? That is a harder question. But should he be a candidate? Absolutely. Because candidacy is not canonization. It is recognition that in a fearful, evasive, and morally exhausted political era, one European leader chose to act, chose to speak, and chose to put his country on record when silence would have been easier. For that alone, Pedro Sánchez has earned a place in the conversation.